Okay, hello everyone, Mr. Ristau here. I thought what I'd do is I'd take a little time. I've had a couple of people ask me about a particular assignment, the one that you see here on the screen. This is assignment 6.2, and this is the assignment that goes with the supply and demand practice scenarios worksheet, where you're going to be diagramming both supply and demand on the same graph, on the same diagram. And people have been wondering, what exactly do we do here? I'm going to work through example number 1, scenario number 1, as a practice, and I will post this in the Unit 2 resource folder for you to look at. Now, I am doing this working under the assumption that you have read at least the material on demand, you've read the material on supply in your textbook, and you've worked through some or all of the supply and demand formative assignments. Okay, so having said that, let's take a look to see what we have here. I am going to start here in the far right column. Notice this column here, it says eco-analysis. Obviously we have our graph. This is where we're going to be putting our graph in the middle column. This far right column here, I'm asking you, what is the equilibrium going to be before the change in the market takes place? What is the change in the market? The change in the market is going to be the prompt, the scenario that you're going to be working with. All right, so what we'll do here is I'm going to get a supply and demand graph, or excuse me, supply curve. And by the way, the market, which is always something that you want to know, right? It's really important that you know what your market is, what the good is, or what the service is. This particular market is computer games. Okay, so let's get a different colored demand curve. Here's my demand curve. So I have a supply for games and I have a demand for games, right? Now, here is equilibrium in the marketplace, right? And I'm going to use some dashed lines to indicate. We'll call this P1 and we'll call this Q1. And like I've been stressing for the last week or two, make sure that all curves and all axes are labeled. Price on the vertical, Q on the quantity, or Q on the horizontal, right, for quantity. So here is equilibrium before. Equilibrium before is just simply labeled as P1 and Q1, right? That's where equilibrium is. Now I could label this as E, but because of the space I have, I think it might get a little messy. So equilibrium before the change in the market is going to be this. Equilibrium before is P1, Q1. Okay. Step 2, now read the change. Now read the scenario. The scenario is, it becomes known that an electronics store is going to have a sale on their computer games 3 months from now. Okay. Now, as you've read about, both supply and demand, there are non-price determinants. They're called curve shifters. That when something other than the price of the good changes, and here it doesn't say anything about the current price of the good changing, it says that the store is going to have a sale, but it's going to be in the future, right? The current price of games is not changing. So this is known as a non-price determinant. This is a curve shifter of demand. And that's my next question. The first thing you want to ask yourself is, does this scenario affect demand or does it affect supply? This is a demand curve shifter, right? You guys have all been to stores who've had sales. They lower prices to try and move product, right? They try to influence your demand in some way. Well, this sale is going to take place 3 months from now. So this is going to be demand, right? And I'll put a D there. What is the non-price determinant? This is going to be, for a lack of space, this is going to be future price, right? Or this is going to be, you can say the sale price is going to, the price is going to go down in the future, but just for brevity's sake, we're going to call this a change in future price. Now, you can ask yourself, what's going to happen to demand? You've established that it's a demand curve shifter. The determinant, the non-price determinant, is future price. The future price is going to go down. But the question is, how is that going to affect current demand? Okay, well, economic behavior dictates that people are going to wait and hold off in buying the games now if they know they can get them cheaper in the future. Okay, so demand may not change for the games right now, but in relative terms, what we'd say is that, and I'll get a different demand curve here. Let's use a blue one. What we'd say here in relative terms, current demand for games would decrease, right? People would hold off and buy the games and wait until the future to buy them at a lower price, the sale price. So we would say then demand has decreased, right? Demand has gone down, and graphically that's indicated by a shift of the demand curve. Remember, we say a shift in the demand curve to the left or inward. Okay, and we are going to label the new equilibrium quantity. Now I'm on step 3. What is equilibrium after the change? Well, equilibrium after the change is right here at Q2 and P2. Okay, so price, we can say equilibrium after is P2 and equilibrium quantity is Q2. Price decreased, as did quantity, right? And what I tell all my econ students to do is maybe draw at least one arrow, so it's very clear and easy for the scorer, the reader, the examiner, myself in this case, so I can see which way your curve shifted. And you must draw an entirely new curve. You cannot just have a demand curve there with an arrow pointing in towards the left. You have to draw a new curve. Okay, so now I've gone through this 3-step kind of methodical process. I took a look to see what equilibrium before was. Equilibrium before is always the market is in equilibrium. Okay, supply and the demand curve aren't intersecting. Here is equilibrium. Then I read the change. The change is the scenario. I asked myself, is it supply or is it demand? That's where it comes in handy knowing what those non-price determinants are, what your curve shifters are for supply and demand. Once I've determined that, I can ask myself, okay, is demand in this case going to increase or decrease? And then I show that on the diagram, making sure that I've got everything labeled. So take a look to see what I have here. I know my market. If it helps to write it down, write it down. And then I take a look, once I've shifted the curve, once I've shown the change on the diagram, ask myself, okay, what's equilibrium after? Equilibrium after was P2. Q2, price decreased, quantity decreased. This is how your diagram should be looking for each one of these, or for any scenario that you do. It's particularly important on the test, because now then we're talking about summative points, right? So I hope that helps. Try your best at these. If you have any questions, please let me know. And, shoot me a message, email me. I've had a lot of good questions, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Bye for now.